From the Ash Rises a Phoenix, Chapter 8, written by Kangarooney. We need to find water. Armin brought light to the Titan in the room. After following their regular procedures, the trio had settled to wait out the activity of daytime hours. During the years Aaron spent in the Cadet Corps, Mikasa and Armin trained for survival off the land. In Armin's pack, he had his map and a book he'd carefully written everything they believed they needed to know. In Drost, in the surrounding towns, water was in great supply. When they lived in Shiganshina, the river flowed through their city, and they never had want for water. Even as street brats, starving one day to the next, the three always had a steady supply of water. None of them considered needing to find water, when they had always had it available at a nearby well or straight from the river. They were growing weak. The few mouthfuls per day weren't enough to keep them going. Now they'd run out of water and had no idea where to find more. Wilderness survival was barely covered in the Cadet Corps. Aside from the one day they were left to find their way to the mountain post and learning how a compass works, Aaron couldn't help either. Suffice to say, the largest threat to their survival wasn't Titans, but dehydration. Leaving during the summertime was a mistake. They should have left during the spring, when rain drenched the land every day. Had the colossal Titan not attacked, they planned to wait until the following spring after Aaron healed from his injury, a plan for him to be honorably discharged from the service. Instead, they were forced to flee, 1/3 of their supplies lost when Mikasa's horse was startled by the sleeping Titan. Instead, they thirsted for anything liquid, going so far as to consider chewing the grass like their mounts did. Could they? Even if a small thunderstorm did pass through, they wouldn't have been able to enjoy it. Summer thunderstorms only rumbled and flashed, leaving no rain, only an occasional bolt that could burn a house down. In their state of living in tree boughs, the storm could have struck them and caused severe burning. How did the trees grow so large if they hadn't been watered since the end of spring? How did the land flourish? Aaron looked at the thick bush on the ground. Since they'd left the high concentration of trees, their path had grown thicker and harder to navigate. The sunlight reached the ground enough for the bushes to grow up, small trees among them. How did this brush grow so thick without water? Unknowingly, Aaron asked this question aloud, still looking below. Movement caught his attention, and he looked to the left. Armin settled beside him, eyes looking down as well. "There has to be water in the ground," Armin declared. Aaron watched Armin, curious. Since their fight 2 days ago, Armin refused to look at Aaron. When he did, his eyes were unreadable, and his expression blank. Now, as if nothing had happened between them, Armin looked up from the ground and met Aaron's eyes straight on. "Listen," Armin straightened, eyes brightening and that glint of discovery shining through. "When it rains, the water doesn't settle on the ground and sit there. Instead, it seeps into the dirt and soaks into the roots below the ground. When I could, I spent time in the herbal fields and helped in the apothecary. There were some plants you only watered once or twice a month, while others required watering every day. The ones we watered twice a month weren't dehydrated, and the owner explained that it took longer to drink the water. Meanwhile, the other plants drank the same water in only a few hours. But the water stays in the ground." Armin took a gulp of air and then continued. "We need to dig. Specifically, we need to dig by the roots. The soil should be damp." Aaron watched his brother wave his hands in excitement. This was the Armin he knew, one who was thrilled to learn and teach. Were they okay? "But if the soil is damp, how do we get the water out of the dirt?" Mikasa asked, poking Armin's theory. That's a good question." Armin released the breath he'd taken to explain his next point. "How do we get the water out?" No one answered. They didn't have the solution. Now, if Aaron were dumb, he might have asked why they didn't think about this problem days ago, when they were beginning to ration their water. Aaron knew why they hadn't. The day after the first three discussed rationing, Armin confronted Aaron on his apparently different attitude. Mikasa didn't intervene. Instead of finding a solution when the problem first arose, They maintained a steady level of silence. The rumble of footsteps, the same every day, approached their hiding spot. Aaron let his eyes drift down to watch the approaching titan. Small, like most that lived in the forest, he wondered if the lack of sun affected their growth too. Moss-green eyes dully fixed on the tree. Its arms hung loose at its sides as it approached. Lips dropped from the mouth, one half of the face slack, the other half raised in a manic grin. The image reminded Aaron of a patient his father once had, a young woman who'd fallen to the ground convulsing. Once Father brought her back from unconsciousness, her eyes were glazed and half her body drooped, unable to move. She'd been taken home. Father visited her regularly, Aaron taken alongside when his mama wanted time alone. Aaron remembered the last visit with the woman, how she turned to greet them, her face crooked. She never healed from her strange attack. The titan reached the base of the tree and listlessly stared up at them, the same crooked face and hollow eyes. He turned away and laid down, ignoring the sharp pieces of bark jabbing into his spine. Sleeping in trees wasn't exactly comfortable. The knot dug deeper in his back, causing him to hiss with dissatisfaction. He raised a hand to his face and rubbed his eyes. Grit accumulated from the long days, scratched his hand rough against his cheek. Come evening, they wanted to set out from this forest and, hopefully, make their way closer to Shiganshina. Without water, they'd never make it. Aaron opened his eyes and watched the shadowed leaves sway in the breeze. Light reflected on each leaf in a different layer of intensity. As the sky grew lighter, their colors grew brighter. When they were deeper in the trees, even during the daytime, the ground had been swathed in shadows. Now, beams made their way through narrow gaps and strengthened the titans below. He reached out towards the sun rays. If only the sun gave energy to them, like it did to the titans. Instead, it forced them to sweat, losing what precious water they still had. In this case, he supposed people weren't that dissimilar from titans. Humans sweat, titans steamed. Wait. Aaron sat up, feeling his eyes widen at the implication. Titans steamed. Armin, Aaron, startled the man in question, jumping to his feet, excited. Titans, Armin? What? Armin placed a hand to his chest. Titans steam. Aaron looked down at the mossy-eyed beast watching his move. The quick turn caused his vision to spin, and Aaron had to catch himself, waiting for the blur to settle. Oh boy, that wasn't good. What about titans, Aaron? Armin brought Aaron back to the present, apparently not noticing his dizzied state. What happens when a pot of soup boils? Aaron could see it in his mind. The core cooks boiling stew and steam rising from them. The steam rises and condenses on... Armin's voice petered out. His eyes met Aaron's wide. Oh, Aaron, you genius! Oh? Aaron chuckled. The word went high at the end, betraying his embarrassment. I wouldn't go that far. Nevertheless, Armin's eyes twinkled. Aaron felt his breath catch in his chest. Just like before, his thoughts whispered. Armin looked young. He reminded Aaron of before, when they came up with games to play and pranks to pull. I can't imagine the water will taste good, but it will have to do for now, Armin muttered, loud enough for the other two to hear. Mikasa, clearly out of the loop, waved her hands to gain their attention. What are you two going on about? Titans? Steam? What does boiling soup have to do with anything? Aaron and Armin exchanged glances and exchanged grins. Aaron's chest seized. This was home. This was freedom. They were charged with a problem, a task, and together they could solve anything. This was his family. This was his dream. To be free of everyday anxieties, the fears for a future. This. The moment passed, and Armin turned away, face animated and arms spread, making exaggerated motions with every word. Mikasa, the solution has been before us for days. When Aaron kills a titan, it steams. When soup boils, it steams. If you put your hand above the soup in the steam, it'll come away wet. Steam is water, and according to my previous readings, that's called condensation. This means if Aaron kills a Titan, we should be able to gather water through condensation. Once Armand finished, Aaron added, we wouldn't necessarily have to kill them. When a Titan is injured, its wound steams until it heals. And depending on how much water each wound generates, we could possibly gather enough to refill our canteens before needing to kill the Titan. Mikasa nodded as he spoke. When he glanced at Armin, he saw a furrowed brow and calculating eyes. Was that look directed at Aaron or at the problem? Then how do we gather the water? Mikasa prodded. We could tie cloths above the Titan when the steam rises. It would collect in the cloth. From there, we could squeeze the water into our mouths or the canteens, Armin proposed. The only problem would be figuring out how close the cloth needs to be, and how angry the Titan will get, Aaron added. I was trained to kill as soon as I could, not play with the Titans, so I don't know if they grow angrier the longer you fight them. He looked over, meeting the mossy eyes. Or really, if they even feel emotion. That's not for us to ponder now, Armin declared, rummaging through his backpack. A blanket would be the best option, though all our blankets are dirty. We're dirty too, Mikasa countered. It's not like we're unused to dirty water, Armin. Not us, at least, he replied. He snapped his mouth shut, turning wide eyes to Aaron. Oh. Aaron had nodded along to the words, thinking of how the trio had drunk from many dirty puddles after Shiganshina. But Armin meant after Aaron left. Their joint planning felt like old times to Aaron. Maybe Armin hadn't felt that. The air was awkward once more. Aaron tried to break it, offering a branch to Armin. It's okay. He rubbed his neck and looked away. He studied the dull-eyed beast. I can drink dirty water still. Did the Titan seem understanding, or was Aaron just projecting? He rubbed his neck harder, forcing his attention to the feeling and not his thoughts. They needed water, not friendship. Mikasa broke the silence. Well, we may as well start. We don't need more than one Titan, right? Right, Armin agreed. At the sound of digging, Aaron knew Armin went back to his initial task. We'll need to find a lower branch to hang these from. Together, the trio tied each blanket together and carefully hung them like a canopy above the Titan. After they'd rigged it, they turned to Aaron, expectant. Aaron, for his part, was busy inspecting the fixture. With how it was hung, he realized his reach was limited. He couldn't fire a piston at one tree across the clearing, or he would be tangled in the blankets. Instead, he would need to stay lower to the ground, closer to the Titan's reach. He checked the air in his tanks and sighed. Water was their most pressing issue, but air was next on the list. As the only one using the air, they'd managed to stretch the 3 sets of tanks out much longer than a single cadet in training had. But they were beginning to run low. Unlike the cadet corps, Aaron did not have a tap to fill up that. And unlike his most recent idea, he wasn't sure where he'd find more air. Aaron? Mikasa prompted, and Aaron pushed the problem away for another day. Okay. He acknowledged her and released a hook, turning so his feet planted against the tree. Aaron let out wire while walking over the edge, belaying himself down the trunk. Belaying was a tactic intended for climbing down the walls. Standing 50 meters high, the walls were taller than any buildings in any of the border cities. While the garrison were adept at launching themselves off walls and making it down safely, the cadets were taught caution as the best route, hence belaying. For Aaron, it was helpful for him to avoid the ropes tying their blankets together. He could drop in the hole without worrying about a breeze pushing him over. Once below the canopy, he anchored his second grapple and reeled the first in. Somehow, he felt as if he were on a stealth mission, one where the enemy knew he was around, but not exactly where he was. Well, the Titan could see him, it just didn't seem particularly inclined to attack. He looked and immediately met its eyes. Creepy. Why was it always staring into his eyes? Goosebumps rippled up his arms. He shivered. He tore his eyes away and looked around for another perch of an equal height. He would need to fire a grapple and let out enough wire to swing low enough to damage the beast, but not low enough for it to grab him. There weren't many options. If he flew too far, then it would move away from the canopy, and the precious steam wouldn't be caught, making the whole exercise a waste. Not for the first time, Aaron wished the Colossal hadn't attacked when it did. If he had had the time, Armin and Mikasa would both be adept with their own ODM gear. Perhaps the three would have considered water a necessity. Then he wouldn't have to be dangling himself as bait, chipping away at Titan fingers like it was a game. If Shadis could see him now. Holding a breath and releasing it slowly, Aaron acted. The grapple shot and hooked. He released the second and placed all his faith that the first would hold. He pulled his blades and swung at the reaching hand. Blood spurted wide, coating his blades and chest. Boiling steam rose high. Aaron held his breath, knowing the steam could burn his lungs. His grapple engaged with flicked trigger, and he rose out of the Titan's reach. Above and behind, he heard Armin whoop with delight. Aaron grimaced as he slammed into the tree, feeling bruises bloom on impact. That quick turn and dizzy spell on the branch earlier hadn't been a fluke. His ears pounded and his vision was all but non-existent. Dehydration was screwing him up. "Did you get what you needed?" he called, still holding the tree as support. "I think one more will work. Then we should harvest it," Armin replied, voice thin over the distance. "Okay," Aaron called back. He turned his head and caught the Titan's eyes again. Walls, this was creeping him out. Ignoring the steady stare, he took another breath and let the stress flow out. "One more pass, Aaron." He aimed for the same trunk and sent out the grapple once more, one more time. The time blurred. Green leaves morphed into a swash of color. Green eyes caused his limbs to tighten, and he felt more than realized when he failed to hit the trigger to pull in the reel, to pull him out of reach. His blades smacked into a wrist, lower than before. The red exploded, mixing with the green. With wide eyes and mouth, steam engulfed Aaron, burning into his lungs, boiling his eyes. He screamed, but no sound escaped with the rush of blood and steam, and black and red joined the mess, and Aaron was yanked up and away. His left hand tightened, while the other remained limp. He watched his blade fall to the forest floor, stepped on by the hungry Titan. How was he rising? His view shifted. He felt the knot buried in his back. This again? Black and yellow flashed above him. Fingers patted his cheeks, ran down his sides. One tried to pry the remaining blade from his hands, but he tightened his grip. No, he couldn't let it go. He'd already lost one. Without one, he would be lost. Shh, it's okay. No, it's not. Stop, he groaned, or tried to. His voice was empty. Nothing came out, even as he opened his mouth. Gaped like a dying fish. Aaron. Yes, that's his name. What? Oh, Aaron. He opened his eyes. When did he close them? The blurred colors grew more focused. Yellow and pink. That was Armin. To the side, black and red, Mikasa. Why were they so close? He groaned. That wasn't what he wanted to say. You'll be okay, Armin murmured. He rested a hand on Aaron's cheek. Oh, Walls, you're so warm. Oh, Walls, it's okay. He moved to comfort Armin, but groaned as sharp white pain blew up his vision. His arm. He moaned. Why did it hurt? What was... No, don't move. Armin's eyes were wet. No, crying meant losing water. Don't cry. Your arm was crushed by the Titan. It swatted you as you swung by. I'm sorry. But did they get water? Armin's face was fading again, colors combining into a swirl of light. At the edges, darkness approached. Was it dusk already? They would need to move on, find Shiganshina, find home.